October 1945. Bavaria, Germany. The war is over. The guns are silent. And the most feared combat general in American history is sitting in a destroyed country he helped destroy, watching his own men watch him. Not German intelligence. Not Soviet spies. Not the remnants of the SS lurking in the Alpine forests. His own people. American intelligence officers. On his tail. Taking notes. Reporting back to Washington. General George S. Patton notices the cars. He notices the faces that keep appearing. He notices the silences in conversations that shouldn't be silent. He has spent 30 years reading battlefields, reading men, reading intentions. He knows what surveillance looks like. And here is the question you need to sit with before we go any further. What do you do when the army you bled for turns its intelligence apparatus against you? Most men crumble. Most men go quiet. Most men play the game. Patton was not most men. He was 60 years old. He had led the Third Army across 1,000 miles of Europe in 281 days. He had broken the Siegfried Line. He had turned an army in the snow to relieve Bastogne. He had crossed the Rhine. He had done things military historians still can't fully explain. And now, in the rubble of a defeated Germany, his own government was watching him like a threat. Watch what a man does when the rules turn against him. That is where you find his true character. To understand what Patton did next, you have to understand what he had become. Not just a general, a problem. A man whose beliefs, whose words, whose instincts had made him dangerous, not to the enemy, but to the new political order trying to be born in post-war Europe. This is that story. The confrontation, the man meets the machine. Imagine you are standing in Patton's boots. You have just ended the bloodiest conflict in human history. You commanded hundreds of thousands of men. You were on the cover of every newspaper. Soldiers cried when they saw you on the road. Enemies trembled at your name. Eisenhower called you the greatest field general of the war. And now, sitting in the back of a staff car driving through a broken German city, you realize you are being followed. Not dramatically, not like a spy film, quietly, professionally, the way professionals do it. Patton had already made the mistake. He had made it publicly, loudly, in the blunt, furious language of a man who had stopped caring about politics the moment the last shot was fired. It was at a press conference, September 22, 1945. Patton had been appointed military governor of Bavaria. He was responsible for rebuilding the region. Part of that rebuilding involved the denazification process, the systematic removal of former Nazi party members from government positions. Patton thought the policy was foolish. He said so. He compared the Nazi Party to the Republican and Democratic parties back home. He said you couldn't run a government if you removed everyone who had ever been a member. He said the German people needed experienced administrators, whatever their prior affiliations. The room went still. The press printed it the next morning. Washington erupted. Eisenhower was furious. The public was outraged. You have to understand the context. The Nazi death camps had been discovered only months earlier. The images were everywhere. The world was still processing what the party Patton was now defending had actually done. Patton was not defending it. Not really. He was thinking tactically, not morally. He was thinking about governance, not genocide. But the words came out wrong, catastrophically wrong. And in 1945, wrong words from a four-star general didn't disappear. They became crises. Eisenhower relieved him of command of the Third Army shortly after. But the surveillance had started before the press conference. That is the part most history books don't dwell on. They were already watching him, because Patton had been saying other things. In private conversations, in letters, in the coded frustrations of a man who had fought the wrong enemy, or so he was beginning to believe. He was speaking openly about the Soviets, about the need to confront them, about the catastrophic diplomatic mistake he believed the Allies were making by allowing Stalin to gobble Eastern Europe. These were not safe things to say in 1945. The alliance with the Soviet Union was the political bedrock of post-war planning. Patton was not just questioning it. He was screaming at it. The internal struggle, the politics, the orders, and the dilemma. Here is the moral gray area that makes this story impossible to resolve cleanly. Patton was right about the Soviets. Not tactically right, not morally right in every sense, but historically right. What he feared would happen, Soviet expansion, the Iron Curtain, the suppression of Eastern European nations, the decades of Cold War. All of it came true. The man who seemed like a dangerous warmonger in 1945 was, in retrospect, describing the next 50 years of world history. But the timing was catastrophic. The world had just ended 6 years of slaughter. The idea of immediately turning around and fighting the Soviet Union, America's wartime ally, was politically and humanly unthinkable. Patton couldn't see that, or wouldn't. He saw the battlefield. He saw the next move. He couldn't see the exhausted human beings around him who needed peace more than they needed to be right. So Washington had a problem. A living legend. A man beloved by soldiers. A man who gave speeches that made veterans weep. A man with enough credibility and enough rage to potentially go public. To go to the press. To write a book. To give speeches that could fracture the fragile political architecture Truman and his advisors were trying to build. The intelligence apparatus was not watching Patton to arrest him. They were watching him to understand him, to predict him, to manage him. And Patton, because he was Patton, figured it out. Here is what the historical record, his diary entries, and the accounts of his aides tell us he did. He did not go quiet. He did not comply. He did not suddenly soften his language or moderate his views to appease the watchers. He did something stranger, something almost theatrical, something that tells you everything about how his mind worked under pressure. He became more vocal in private, not less. He spoke more openly to the people around him who he trusted. He wrote more freely in his diary. He treated the surveillance not as a threat to suppress himself, but as confirmation that he was worth suppressing. And to Patton, being worth suppressing meant he was still relevant, still dangerous, still in the fight. He was using the surveillance as evidence of his own importance. Imagine what that does to the men watching you. They are trying to neutralize you by monitoring you, and you respond by treating their monitoring as a medal. I am not going to be neutralized by the sons of bitches. I'll be damned if I play dead for politicians. He also did something else, something more calculated. He began preparing to write his memoirs. In the autumn of 1945, Patton threw himself into the project. He worked on his papers. He organized his diaries. He was building something, not just a personal record, a public record, an account of the war as he had seen it, including the decisions he disagreed with, the political constraints he had chafed against, and his views on the Soviet threat. Washington knew this, and Washington was concerned. A Patton memoir, written in his scorching, unfiltered voice, published while the Cold War political framework was still being assembled, that was a grenade with the pin pulled. He was relieved of his command in early October. He was given a face-saving assignment. Command of the 15th Army, a paper army, tasked with writing the history of the European campaign. No troops, no power, no war to fight. Patton called it what it was. A cage made of paper. December 9th, 1945, near Mannheim, Germany, a bright cold Sunday morning. Patton is in a staff car heading to a pheasant hunt. It is one of his last pleasures in a country that no longer needs him. A U.S. Army truck runs a red light. It hits the staff car at low speed. A minor collision. The kind of accident that happens 100 times a day in occupied Germany. Everyone in the vehicle shakes it off, except Patton. He is thrown forward. His head hits the partition. His neck breaks at the 3rd and 4th cervical vertebrae. He is paralyzed from the neck down. He feels nothing below his shoulders. He can still talk. He can still think. He is still, unmistakably himself. He is rushed to the hospital in Heidelberg. For 12 days he fights, because Patton always fought. He told his wife Beatrice, who flew to be with him, "This is a hell of a way to die." He was right. It was. A truck. A Sunday morning. A broken neck. The warrior who had survived bullets and bombs and artillery and 30 years of warfare, taken down by a slow-moving vehicle in peacetime. He died on December 21, 1945, 12 days after the accident. And then the questions started. The questions that have never fully stopped. The driver of the truck, Technical Sergeant Robert Thompson, gave an account of the accident that some witnesses contradicted. The truck's ownership and origin were muddled in the records. A man named Douglas Bazata, an OSS officer, claimed decades later that the accident had been engineered. That Patton was meant to be incapacitated. That powerful interests wanted him silenced before he could go home and start talking. Bazata's claims were made late in life. They were never proven. They were never conclusively disproven. Historians remain divided. What is not disputed, Patton was under active surveillance by American intelligence at the time of his death. What is not disputed, he was planning to resign his commission and return to America to speak publicly about Soviet expansionism and U.S. foreign policy. What is not disputed, powerful people in Washington considered him a serious political liability. What you believe about what happened next is, ultimately, a question about how much you trust the institutions of power. And that is a question each person has to answer for themselves. His diaries and papers were seized after his death. Some of the most sensitive material disappeared for years before surfacing in archives. The memoirs he was preparing, the ones that could have been the most explosive military memoir in American history, were edited and published posthumously in a far tamer form than what his original notes suggested. The grenade was disarmed, slowly, carefully, after the man who pulled the pin was gone. What do we do with George Patton in 2025? He was a military genius and a man of profound moral contradictions. He slapped a shell-shocked soldier and called him a coward. He wept at the graves of men he had ordered into certain death. He was racist in ways that were common for his era and inexcusable in any era. He was also the general who, more than any other American officer, broke the Wehrmacht's back and shortened the war in Europe. He was right about the Soviets in ways that took the rest of the world 50 years to catch up to. And he died, or was silenced, depending on your reading, before he could say so publicly. The surveillance he discovered and responded to with defiance and productivity tells you something essential about him. Most men, upon discovering they are being watched by their own government, become smaller. They self-censor. They moderate. They play the game. Patton wrote more, spoke more freely, prepared more aggressively. He understood something that very few people ever do. The moment you become worth watching is the moment you most need to keep moving, because stillness is what they want from you. Quiet is what they need from you. Your silence is the only thing that protects the story they are trying to tell without you. Patton refused to be silent, even at the end, even paralyzed in a hospital bed in Heidelberg, even knowing, as he surely knew, that the America he was going home to was not the America he had fought for. He had given 30 years to the uniform. He had bled for a flag. He had buried more men than he could count. And his reward was a paper army, a surveillance detail, and a truck on a quiet Sunday morning. The object of war is not to die for your country, but to make the other bastard die for his. No one made anyone die on that Sunday morning in December. But someone, accident or otherwise, made Patton stop talking, made the most dangerous voice in the post-war world go permanently silent, made the memoir stay locked in a box, made the warning about Soviet expansion go unheard for another decade. History does not always reward the men who are right. Sometimes it buries them. Sometimes it buries them in a car accident on a road in Bavaria while the world is busy celebrating the peace they helped create. George Patton is buried in Luxembourg. At the American cemetery in Ham, he requested to be buried with his men. Over 5,000 American soldiers rest there. He lies at the front, his request, facing the troops he led in death as he led them in life. That detail, that single human detail, tells you more about him than any biography ever could. The general who could not stop leading, even underground. Here is the question I want you to sit with and answer in the comments below. If Patton had lived, if he had gone home, resigned his commission, and published his true memoirs and spoken openly about Soviet expansion, would history have changed? Would anyone have listened? Or was he already too dangerous, too loud, and too inconvenient for a world that had just decided it was done with dangerous, loud, inconvenient men? Let us know in the comments.